They're all dead. Don't have to wait this time, 'cause I'm giving up on my sense of control.
A lot of people don't realize on here, I forget myself half the time in almost 6 years of doing this shit. I have almost 100 fucking game reviews on here. I forget at least 40 of the games I reviewed in almost 6 years of doing this. That's the God's honest truth. So it's really fun to go back, check out A, how bad I was, and B, just what I chose to pick at that time in my life. So here it is. I'm going to do it not how most people do it, like seasons or sets, just like games in general. Like if I did a whole series, I'm going to start with my favorite, Castlevania, the collection.
Originally released for the Famicom Disk System in 1986 in Japan, it made its way stateside a year later in '87. And when it did, man, everyone's socks were blown off. This is the epitome of an action platformer. At the time, nothing was really seen like it, and it definitely holds up. Set in the year 1691, this is where it all began for the franchise. With some 30 plus games later, you can always trace the roots back to the best parts of the series in the beginning. Castlevania 1 introduced Simon Belmont, the vampire killer, with an amazing soundtrack, a cool arsenal of weapons, sub-weapons, all sorts of new things and innovations. Castlevania definitely left players frustrated and coming back for more. A lot of that frustration we gamers had with this game lies solely in the jumping mechanics, as you have no control over your jump while in midair. Also, when you get hit by an enemy, you get knocked back, which, as you've seen time and time again, causes nothing but problems. The stairs don't help matters much. Some of the most frustrating parts of any Castlevania game is when you're trapped on the stairs and there's nothing you can do about it. You just gotta trudge through and hope for the best. The game was one of the first titles released for the NES after the initial first wave of black box games. Gamers were totally caught off guard by this game, and they loved it. Then, now, and forever, the original Castlevania is a great game, a must-play, and one of the greatest video games of all time. I mentioned that killer soundtrack. Honestly, this is one of the greatest game soundtracks of all time. There's no debating that. So there you have it, one of the greatest video games of all time, one of my personal favorites, and one of the classic, quintessential Halloween-themed video games, Castlevania for the NES. Not every entry in a franchise is a success, and today's game is a prime example of that. Today we're going to check out Castlevania The Adventure, released in 1989 for the Game Boy by Konami. Now if that intro came off as kind of slow, I can't help it. That's the way I move, talk, and feel in general after playing this game for a good amount of time. The technical limitations at the time for this Castlevania game were not there yet on a handheld device. This game is notoriously known for having some of the worst slowdown in gaming history, and it's not even slowdown, the entire game is so slow. At the time though, it was awesome to have Castlevania on the go. If you loved Castlevania, this was awesome. However, I feel most fans were disappointed not just with the slowdown, but a lot of aspects of the game. Now graphically, it's unfair to compare the Game Boy to NES games at the time. but Castlevania The Adventure is panned a lot for its lackluster, pretty much basic graphics. Compared to Castlevania 2's Belmont's Revenge released later, about a year or two, there was no competition. Belmont's Revenge blew this game out of the water graphically in almost every other aspect. Now imagine playing a Castlevania game with no sub-weapons. Well, that's exactly what you have here. Castlevania The Adventure features absolutely no sub-weapons, not one. You can upgrade your whip to a point where it shoots flames, and hearts, as in most Castlevania games, refill your sub-weapon meter. No, here they actually refill your health. So immediately that's a big turn away for hardcore Castlevania fans. Sub-weapons essentially make a Castlevania game for the most part, and to not have them included is just criminal. There's only 4 stages. For a Game Boy game, that's pretty commonplace. But you only get 3 lives per stage, and when you die, you have to start at the very beginning of the level, unlike in Castlevania 1 and 3, where you get to start at the last place you died, a checkpoint in the stage, so to speak. Well, I've tried this game as a kid. This was one of my first introductions as a kid. The only Castlevania games I had as a kid were this and Simon's Quest. Imagine that. Imagine that being getting your feet wet on this franchise. I didn't fall in love with Castlevania until the 16-bit era. This game was so frustrating as a kid. Honestly, I never beat it. I didn't even care enough about beating it. The slowdown, even as a kid in 1989, was frustrating enough. So that's Castlevania The Adventure. Like I said, the sequel, Belmont's Revenge, is leaps and bounds over this game. The music in Castlevania The Adventure is definitely the best part about it. The tracks in the game are amazing. For a lot of Game Boy games it had good music, but the Castlevania series on Game Boy are just some of the best.
Released in 1991, Super Castlevania 4 took everything from the previous entries in the series and perfected it. The 2 biggest improvements in my opinion, besides the overhaul graphically and the amazing soundtrack, is the refined jumping and the 8-directional whipping, which by all means should come back, should have never went away, and should have been there from the beginning. Let's take a look. While technically a remake of the first Castlevania game, this don't feel like the same Simon Belmont to me. This guy doesn't jump like a lush, doesn't have stairs kick his ass the whole game. This Simon Belmont knows what's up. If you die in this one, it's your fault. While there's no such thing as any Castlevania game that at some point doesn't make you throw your controller out of frustration, the difficulty is definitely in Castlevania 4, but it's not nearly as staggering as 3. And maybe the biggest and most important part of why Castlevania 4 is the best in the series in a lot of people's opinions is the atmosphere. The opening cutscene, back then to this day, from the sound, the visual, the execution, is one of the creepiest goddamn things you will ever see in a video game. With that being said, if you're a fan of side-scrolling, old-school 2D action platformers, you cannot go wrong with Super Castlevania 4. It was perfect then, it's perfect now, it's good on any occasion, Christmas, July 4th, and especially Halloween. Like Democrats and Republicans, there's usually one of 2 camps when it comes to fans of the Castlevania series. Those that love the straight-up linear style of the old-school entries, or the Metroidvania style the series would branch into after the release of the ultra-hit Symphony of the Night in 1997. Personally, if you haven't figured it out in almost 3 years of making videos on here, I'm a fan of the linear style, but that doesn't mean I hate on the Metroidvania style. Once in a while I get the itch, bust it out, get down with some Metroidvania Castlevania, this time for the GBA, checking out the second game released on the system, Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance. Now I say second game for the GBA because the first game, Castlevania Circle of the Moon, straight up took that Symphony of the Night formula and adapted it to the GBA. It was executed pretty well, but the graphics were a little meh, and other than that, not a lot to say about that one. It was pretty basic Castlevania. Harmony of Dissonance is more of the same, but a bit more refined. Let's take a look. This time, yet again, you're another member of the Belmont family, Just, or Justy, or Justy, or however the hell you say it, because literally I had to look up online how to pronounce it in order to do this video, because it's one of the most confusing names of a protagonist I've ever seen in a game. Now look, I have to put on the brakes real quick, because honestly, when you talk about all three releases for the GBA, all the Castlevania games pretty much are the same. There's not a lot to say. With a few spell additions or items or something about the leveling, there's not a whole lot of difference that separates this from the other game that was actually released in a 2-pack in 06, Aria of Sorrow. They're pretty much the same game. Out of all three of the games, I'd say Aria of Sorrow is the best, but Harmony of Dissonance has enough exploration and the castle's pretty big to keep you busy for quite a while. My biggest complaint is that just the combat in the game, the enemies don't feel that Castlevania-ass hard as most of the other games do. I see why they did it. It gives you a chance to look around more, but still, that was a major disappointment for me. And speaking of disappointment, this will officially be the first time in any review I've ever said a Castlevania game just didn't have good music. Even Castlevania The Adventure, Belmont's Revenge, those games had kick-ass music, but on here, it's okay at best, but man, with the combination of the choppy, staticky sounding GBA sound system and just the half-ass effort put into the composing of the songs, yeah, not very good. Shitty music aside, none of the complaints I have about this game are enough to make you deter from playing it. It's still a pretty good game, and I'd check it out, and I'd definitely add it to your collection if you collect for the GBA. Until next time, this is Castlevania, Harmony of Dissonance, on a Hibiki. Halloween.
I haven't done one of these in a while. Countdowns usually I don't really tend to like to do, just because of all the opinions, the flack you get, plus just narrowing it down to two things you love so much, sometimes it's impossible to make a decision, and I don't want countdown lists on my channel to have a lot of ties. So this time I decided to go easy on myself and narrow it down to three. The three I already knew in the top of my head for today's list, the top 3 greatest ever Castlevania games. Now I know some Castlevania games aren't fair to compare to others, like for example Castlevania on Game Boy. You can't really compare that to Symphony of the Night. The technology were leaps and bounds different, and everyone hates the original Castlevania Game Boy game anyways, so. With that being said though, that takes us to number 3. Castlevania Symphony of the Night. A lot of you would probably put this at the top of your list, as this is probably one of the most decorated and beloved in the entire franchise. However, on my list, it falls at number 3 strictly because, as a lot of people tend to like, I like the linear style of Castlevania preferably over this style, the Metroidvania. Now obviously it's number 3, and that without going said means it's a great game. I love the graphics, the sound is amazing and features one of my all-time, probably top 5 favorite Castlevania songs on the soundtrack, Lost Painting. Check that out if you never heard it. But with that minuscule gripe out of the way, Symphony of the Night is a masterpiece, one of the greatest games on the PSX. Released in '97, this took Castlevania to a whole nother level. Fans are obsessed with this game to this day as they still stream it to complete it 100% through. The first time I've ever seen leveling up in an item selection quest to this extent in a Castlevania game. And there is so much content to this, like you will spend so much time just messing around, configuring with items and whatnot. And once you complete the game, it's common knowledge that you have to complete the entire castle again, backwards. It was the first time a Belmont wasn't the main protagonist. and you could be a Belmont, but you have to beat the game first to unlock Trevor. It's worth it, and it gives a more playability aspect. I highly recommend this, as of course I've put it number 3 on the list. But moving on the list, let's check out number 2. Released in '91, Super Castlevania 4 is in my book one of the greatest video games of all time. It made the leap from 8-bit to 16-bit and hardcore glory. Everything about the graphics are vibrant, beautiful, the details in the background, and let's talk about the control, the best part of the game. For the first time, you could whip your whip in 8 different directions based on the D-pad movements. This was awesome. You could even fool around with it too, like a little yo-yo. The music is some of the best on the Super Nintendo and definitely in video gaming. A lot of people fondly remember the intro. Nothing at the time was quite seen like it. This blew everyone's mind, including mine. So that's number 2, Super Castlevania 4. I had such a hard time narrowing this down to the top. This was my initial gut feeling one, but at the end of the day, I could never put a Castlevania game above Castlevania Bloodlines. That's right, if you guys know me or follow my channel, you pretty much knew what number 1 was going to be. I don't know what it is, there's just something about Bloodlines that makes it my favorite Castlevania game. The best music on the Genesis, in my opinion the best graphics on the Genesis, that true old school Castlevania feel in the gameplay. The 8-directional whipping movement's gone, but it's okay because you get the choice of 2 characters and one of them has a spear. It's a little different take on it, but it's good for replayability. The bosses can be extremely frustrating, but not too much. Some of the enemy placement's a little off, but that's fine. This is pretty much the perfect Castlevania game, and my all-time favorite, Castlevania.